I'm here to say that one of the terms that we put in the handbook on animal-assisted therapy years ago was something called animal-assisted interventions. And it's a term that I think is a great umbrella that says a lot of people do interactions with animals. Now, many of you who do this on a volunteer basis do something that's technically called animal-assisted activities versus what people would call me by saying that I do animal-assisted therapy. I want to really be clear with this. I'm not looking at this as a hierarchy because I really respect the work that we all do. I just respect it for what it is. The example that I gave of Alexander and Gleason, Sue was a pet partner. What a wonderful gift Sue gave Alexander. I think of a story of a man who lived in Colorado. He was in a rehab facility and was really depressed, and he was Russian. Nursing staff didn't communicate well with him, and they didn't know how he was doing. There was a person that kept on bringing in a dog. So the nursing staff said, "It can't hurt, can it? Bring the dog to visit the guy." So when the dog came in, he perked up a bit. And the nursing staff said, "It didn't hurt, bring him back." And they did this many times until finally one day he sat up in a real broken English. One, because he had a stroke. Two, because English wasn't his native tongue. And listen to what he said. He said, "In my country, I was a veterinarian. She gives me a reason to get out of here." So ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand that sometimes serendipity, sometimes an organized visit doesn't have to be done with a therapist. But I do want to explain that what I have learned over 35 years is some very creative ways that I've learned to do this. And I'll tell you a couple of those examples. So, I mentioned the diversity of terms. So let's just take a look at some of the reasons. And I wrote about this in the handbook of animal-assisted therapy, and then in Afternoons with Puppy, you see it more livingly by getting a chance to see this in a more emotional way. So how do people use animals with individuals? And the same would come true for many of you. One is we use the animals as a social lubricant. We sometimes use them as a catalyst for emotions. Sometimes we do it just to change an environment. Because when you think about it, when you go to Dr. Fine's office, it's a weird office. You know what I mean? And I always let people know, because most people call me, not because I only use animals, I specialize in working with a certain kind of child, but they all know that I have animals, and I have to let them know that, because if you have allergies, it's not like I can take my animals out of that process. I can say we can stay in one room, but the reality is, although I have 3 rooms there, the dogs are wandering always around, and so if you're highly allergic to animals, it's a problem. If you're afraid of animals, because I sometimes work with people that have phobias, if you're afraid of dogs, especially some of the parents, their kids like the animals, the parents don't. I just am conscious of that, so I don't have the dogs maybe greeting you in the front. The dogs won't come up to the front, they'll just stay in one of the rooms in the back. So let's take a look at some of these ideas. Animals acting as a social lubricant. And basically, this comes from some of the pioneer work of 40 years ago. There are lots of terms, the rippling effect, what have you. But it really basically says that when we see animals around clinicians, around people like you, it makes you look much more endearing. Think about it. It makes you look kinder and warmer, and it sometimes can get you to have a conversation. I want to explain something that I really believe in. One of the words that I have used very clearly is I see my animals as true co-therapists. But that means not every dog, not every bird, not every lizard, not every cat can do this kind of work. Over the years, I've had a couple of dogs that I felt are wonderful companions in my home. I love them dearly. One of my favorites, his name was Shrimp. If you want to know why his name was Shrimp, he was the runt of the litter, was going to die. It was actually one of the reasons why Puppy got beaten up the most at the end, was that I didn't realize that she was pregnant too when I got her. She had a whole bunch of puppies when we felt her tummy go, geez, her nipples are swollen. I wonder why. And then I said, there are two reasons why they can be swollen. The first one was that she's pregnant, and she was. And when Shrimp was born, he was going to die. I went to a vet. We gave him oxygen, and I was told that the only way we could keep him alive was to tube feed him. And we were told that they could do it, and it would cost a lot of money, or I could do it, and he would teach me. And I said to my wife, well, why don't we do it together? But my wife already knows that joint projects sometimes don't work that way at the end. That sooner or later the joint goes more to her side. So she said, do you want to do this or want to do it? And I'll tell you the truth, it was the best month of my life. In fact, Shrimp even was at a hockey clinic with some professional ice hockey players. I had to go, and so I wrapped him up. I still remember when he was a puppy, for part of the time we had him bundled because I always had to do the feeding. But when it was time to adopt that, I said, I just can't do this. Talk about attachment theory, I really went through that. He never was a therapy dog, but towards the end of his life, it used to bug me because everyone would go to work and Shrimp would stay home. But by the end of his life, he reminded me of an old Southern gentleman. What a beautiful man he was. And my young patients loved him to death. And he passed away 5 years ago. And he was a combination of the Siberian Husky. All their puppies look so different, but he was a combination of the Siberian Husky and, of course, puppy, which was a golden. So I showed this slide because in many ways I've learned to dance with my animals because I anticipate them. So it becomes almost like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. But on the other hand, when I talk about Ketsie, for example, I can't bring Ketsie to work because right now she's not Ginger Rogers. Because I can't spend time worrying that she's going to be inconsistent. Because if I worry about the inconsistencies, I can't do my job. And people are coming to me because they know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so this is a real crucial piece. And so, again, that's one of my favorite pictures of Puppy. And I've done research on this, when people view you alongside a very gentle, calming animal, it does change the way they view you and see you. Why are dogs such wonderful therapy beings to begin with? I don't know if many of you realize how long dogs have been bred and domesticated. It's over 10,000 years. Horses, for example, 4,000 years. So dogs have a real long edge over many of the other beings. And so what's really interesting is research has pointed out that for dogs to be so successful in their domestication, they have learned very well how to adapt to you. And there are certain species of dogs that are better, and we can talk about this, but the reality is, one of the attributes that dogs bring to the table is their ability to read you. And I've always felt that dogs are very good readers of nonverbal behavior. And people have looked at studying dogs' eye movement. I don't know if you've ever recognized how dogs move their eyes on your face to predict your emotions. And that's not hogwash because there are people in Hungary that are doing research on this. If you're interested, I can share with you some of the studies that look at this. So dogs are tremendous readers of nonverbal behavior. That's what makes them much more effective in their work. So, this is Puppy. Didn't get a chance to meet her. I always call her here Carl Rogers with fur. Look how relaxed she looks there. And you can see here with the smile that the teeth part aren't so good. But Puppy, when I first met her, wasn't as comfortable in human touch. But over a course of time, she really strived on wanting to interact with me. And so finally, after about a year, I had been using birds in my office, and at this point I had a guinea pig and a bunny rabbit, but I wasn't using Goldie, my first dog, because I didn't feel that he would have been a great therapy dog because I saw the stressors. She was not stressed, she was really just a laid-back dog. So I started to bring her to my office. So let's just go back, I don't know, 25 years ago. A little girl was referred to me. She was referred because she had selective mutism. Those of you that don't know what this is, selective mutism means you can speak, but you choose not to speak. Now she was a young girl, so when she was in preschool, she didn't go to school, to preschool, she was mainly at home, maybe 1 day a week. Parents weren't that concerned about it because at the house with them, she spoke. When visitors came, they said, well, she just is shy. Well, when she went to kindergarten, it wasn't working because she didn't speak. And after about 3.5 months, they finally said, this isn't working. The school was concerned. They called the pediatrician. The pediatrician said, go to see him. Usually when I meet families, traditionally the first meeting, I usually talk with parents. One, because I don't like kids sitting in a waiting room because it's boring and I don't want to make them worried. That day got a bit confused, and they brought the little girl with them. Like any other given day, Puppy would march into the waiting room. So there she was doing the doggy song, which we're talking about, and she leaned her face on the little girl's lap, and she petted her for a while. Puppy was one of the dogs that I did teach sign language, a very bright golden actually. And so I signed for Puppy to come back. So we're looking at the distance of you to I now. And so Puppy, her eyes were on me, and she came back. And I looked at the little girl and said, honey, it seemed like she wanted the dog to come back. I said, all you have to do is say, Puppy, come. Please come. Now the parents are looking at me going, Doc, if she could do this, we wouldn't be here. But for the first time, they heard their daughter in a very low voice say, come, Puppy. So it was the cold nose and the warm heart of that dog that got this on the start. We changed that whole visit. I said to the parents, you know what? I'm not going to talk to you today because I already got something going here. If you don't mind, just go into the other room and I'll sit. And I brought Puppy back and I sat on the floor with the girl. And we spoke, not a lot, but we spoke because the secret was sort of out of the bag. Weeks went on and we began to do a little bit more interaction. But you know what? She spoke with me now with Puppy, but I couldn't, there was no change at school. And it doesn't really matter if I'm making changes in my office because if I can't get a dog at school, it's useless. So we elected to go and visit a school and the teacher. And we had a special lunch because I said to the girl, do you want to have Puppy meet you at school? And we'll have lunch with your teacher. And we practiced a bit. Because again, that's the psychology. Because I use the dogs as co-therapists. It's just not the magic bullet that they come in and they throw themselves on you. And you got to know what you're doing with this. So I use, and I'm a cognitive psychologist, so I use cognitive approaches. We practiced. And guess what? It was the first time the teacher heard the little girl speak. The bad part about my job is sometimes I go in and out of people's lives, and I always don't get the whole story. People always ask me, and I'm going to give you a couple more, that people always ask me, would I have been able to teach this girl to speak without Puppy? Probably yes, because I know lots of techniques of how to do this, but on that given experience, she was the one that got this started. So how do I use the animals with my clients? I basically look at the client's background, figure out what they are, then I think about the benefits of the approaches I use. Because there are cohorts of patients that I don't even use the animals at all. They might just come say hello and hang out, but there's no therapeutic. Their therapeutic involvement is less. There always is part of their therapeutic involvement because, remember I talked about milieu, I did a study that looked at how the animals change the work environment. So many people look at buildings and look at what's on the walls, how it's painted. I think that's all important. But what's it like in my office where you have these very calming animals? What's it like in my office when I had a terrarium and a vivarium together that had a waterfall and had these very gentle fish swimming? What do you think most people do in my front office? They fall asleep. The parents say this is the best hour that I spent all week, and they say that because it's very calming. So you got to be able to think through this. So let me give you another example of a dog, and this is Heart. And that's the dog that's on the other book, and I'd love you to look at it. And I'm going to just sit over here with you. This is the story of Heart. And this girl, I'm going to go back one. Heart was a change of career guide dog. And when I say that, we got Heart when she was younger. And it was my little son's project And she was a wonderful, wonderful dog. We had different names selected for her. Those of you that know anything about Guide Dogs of America, you get a letter, and then you have to name the dog with that letter. So ours was H, of course, my little son, H, Black Labrador, Hershey. That didn't fly. We had a whole bunch of H names. None of them worked. Finally, they agreed to one name, and the name was Hart. Now, they didn't let us spell her name H-A-R-T. They said how to spell it H-A-R-T. They didn't let us spell it H-E-A-R-T. They said how to spell it this way. That was fine. Hart went through the program, left us, and in fact was going to go all the way on to becoming a guide dog. And at her last physical, they heard a noise. They gave her an echocardiogram, and they also did some other heart tests. They found that the heart had a heart murmur. So Hart, who had a heart murmur, came back to us. And she was a wonderful Labrador. I think it's funny because of all my dogs, she was so bright. And there's something about Labradors, I don't mean to say this in a rude sense, but Goldens are very beholding. When they make a mistake, and if you ever scold them, they really get their feelings hurt. Hart was an independent operator. You know what I mean? So when she messed up, she looked and said, well, that's the way it goes. Throw me out and move on. She was a wonderful dog, but because she was trained as a guide dog, she was wonderful. And there were certain skills that she had that were different. So let me tell you about the time that Hart met a girl named Sarah. Sarah was a girl that came to see me that was referred because she was depressed. I remember the first time we met, she wore a baseball cap where the brim of the cap covered her eyes. She wore a khaki army jacket. But what I remember the most is that she shook when she spoke. That was the day she met Hart. And Hart has that very angelic face. And Hart went with her, and they interacted a bit. And then when she sat down, because Hart was trained as a guide dog, she sat under her chair. And as the girl spoke, periodically she would shake, not because there was any other reason, she would just shake. And periodically Hart would bob up her head, almost like saying, he's a nice guy, don't worry about him. She pet her. Well, that was the end of our visit. We talked for a while, and I got to meet her. Ironically, a week later, I got a phone call. Well, I didn't get the phone call, the dog did. And it said she was going to come back to visit us when she was in the hospital. What happened in the time between our first visit was it was discovered that this girl was a serious cutter. And she used to cut her thighs a lot. But what happened with her was that she cut her arms really bad one day, and the school counselor saw it, and they hospitalized her. But she wanted to let us know that she was going to come back because, not me, that she liked Hart. So the day she came back to visit us, I never forgot this day. We talked for a while, and her sleeve was covered, and we talked, and then I said, I know you were at the hospital. Would you mind showing me your wounds? Because in many ways, they'd be healed up. And she lifted the sleeve, and I saw these scratches, so to speak. And they were drying now and healed. But when she had her arm like this, it caught the eyes of Hart. And what I would call eyes of puzzlement. Hart had never seen something like this, I think. And looked at her, looked at me, and did what most dogs would do. Although sometimes we don't like when therapy dogs do this. She went over and licked her. And the girl fell to the floor and began to cry. And that was the beginning of her therapy. Because then I found out that this girl and I were going to become fast friends. After weeks of problem solving, we realized that this girl had much more than depression. She had some history in her background, and she was extremely anxious. She had social anxiety. We pulled her out of school. We put her on correct pharmacology, and we sort of rebuilt the whole system. Then part of her treatment was that since she wasn't in school and was being on a homeschooling basis, we had her volunteer at a nursery. She could feel good about it. But because of her love of animals, we had her volunteer at a shelter, and was doing a great job. And again, the bad part about my job is that sometimes I never know the end of the story. She did better, and I didn't hear from her. Well, many years later, this is 2003, a few years later, I was in Amsterdam lecturing, and I got this email. It said, you may not remember me, but I was seeing you for a while when I was younger. I was doing research about animals and psychology. I read about a book you were writing. That was after News of Puppy. I was scared. It reminded me when I had seen you. I was scared and nervous about saying the wrong thing that I usually didn't talk much. I remember how whenever I was really nervous, Heart and Shrimp would be right there, as if telling me you're not a bad guy. Heart especially seemed to be the one being the psychologist, always sitting near me, comforting me. She's what I remember the most. She gave me an excuse to talk to my mom about what was going on. In the end, I don't even remember what we talked about, but all that I did tell you was for those two. And for some of the fish, though one is able to talk to fish, and even the bearded dragon. My mom and I still talk about one of the fish in the waiting room that would swim in a repetitive motion. It looked like it was the happiest fish in the world. I still tell my friends that I went on a walk with a bird. They don't believe me. You know what? She wrote me that letter in July of 2003. I hadn't seen her for a few years. But she started this. And so I said, you know, it would be interesting, because I don't usually do this. I'll invite her back. Because she wrote me, and I figured since she initiated, I'd say, would you like to come and just say hi? So she came in. It's now 3 or 4 years later. Looked like a different girl. She wasn't wearing a baseball cap anymore. She had her hair pulled back. She was happy. She let me know she was doing great in school. She was going to go to college. She even had friends, and she was driving. We talked, we visited. Did she come to visit me? What did you say? What did you say? The dog. The dogs, she said. Well, she didn't even come to see the dog. She really came to see a dog. And I said, would you like to see her? She looked at me and she said, is she still alive? And I said to her, not only is she alive, she's the only one here today. Do you want to see her? I said, wait. So she sat down, and I went to the back room, and I opened up the door. And out came Hartley, the best doggy song I've ever seen, wagging that tail with a rhythm of a drum. And that was the second time I watched her. She fell to the floor and embraced that lab like I'd never seen anyone embrace a dog. And she looked her in her eyes and said, it's hard to believe that that a dog got me to talk. And so, again, these are some very creative episodes just looking at that one piece. Many other ways of how we can use animals for teaching. And I know we started, is it okay if I go about 15 minutes longer, only because we started about 20 minutes later and I still have time. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, my thing doesn't leave until 3:20, so and it's right near the airport, right?
Yep.
Yeah, very close. So there are many things that we've heard about. I could talk with you for hours if you have questions. What are other ways that I use animals? We're going to talk about animals as teaching. Thank God it was closed, otherwise I'd have to be mopping. But I've used, I journal write, I do puppetry. When we used to do puppets, Hart, because she was trained to speak, I could get her to join in puppet shows. We use a variety of ways. Many of you have heard of people using what we call second leash on life programs, where we use animals, training of a puppy or a dog at the Humane Society to help them get adopted. But what we end up finding out is that on the way to them getting adopted, they become better. The people become better. Although the research on this is very poor. And so that's a concern that I have, that many of these second leash on life programs, the data is very, very poor. I want to give you an example of a project that I'm involved right now that we're using some pet partners, and I wanted you to get a chance to see this. The National Institute of Child and Human Development funded some very large studies. One of the large studies, there were 4 large studies that were funded for a 3-year investigation. One of them was with Sabrina Shuck at University of California, Irvine, and I'm honored that I'm the consultant for that project. Basically, this is a project that we're using actually some pet partners in, and that was one of the things I wanted to show you that looks at some creative ways that we have folks involved. It's a very structured social skill program. It's a very, very complicated treatment to that degree. But we have a whole HAI, human-animal interaction program, and I want you to see this, plus parent training. So the name of the program is called the PAC Project, Positive, Assertive, Cooperative Kids. Again, therefore, the PAC idea. Many of you, if you're unfamiliar with ADHD, although ADHD is a disorder that looks at inattention and hyperactivity, one of the hallmark concerns of ADHD are social problems. Many of these individuals have serious interpersonal difficulties. Part of it is that maybe they're not stopping and regulating their behavior. So if you don't stop and regulate, you don't stop and think about what you do. Many, many concerns that lead to serious interpersonal rejections, like peer rejections. You know, I remember years ago coaching an ice hockey team, and I had a mom that came, you know, asked me to come over, so I skated over to her, and she said, you know, you got to watch this kid, you know, Coach Aubrey. And I go, why do I have to watch the kid? And she said, he's one of those Ritalin kids. He's a troublemaker. And I looked at her and said, well, no worries, I'm a Ritalin doctor, and he's going to be fine. And he was wonderful in our group because I adapted what we did. But many children with ADHD have these social skill problems. So what are our components? And I'm really not going to show you the social skill part, but part of the program and how we use the dogs, and this is, we have pet partners involved in this whole program. Thanks to Delta at the national level, they helped advertise, and we got some of the pet partners involved. Part of the program is this free play portion. Every time the kids come in for the first 20 minutes before they go into structured interaction, we have free play, 3 stations. We have agility training with the dog that does agility work. We have free play with the dog with frisbees and ball throwing and, of course, brushing. And then we have rug time with therapy where the dog hangs out and we do arts and crafts, all themed towards animal kinds of projects. We have card games that relate to animals, puzzles that relate to dogs, all of it relates. And again, the dog is sitting there with the pet partner and the kids can interact with brushing, petting while they're doing this work. We have a complete Humane Education program, and basically those of you know what Humane Education is. It's teaching civic responsibility, it's teaching responsible behavior around various kinds of creatures, and so we have a variety of things that we do with that. The American Humane Kids program, which the American Humane Society actually helped us develop this portion as part of their project. Again, these are pillars of character. So we have a curriculum that we developed, and I'll show you the dog there. Of course, it's a golden. I had one of my students draw this. And that's Rock and Rover. You'll get a chance to understand why Rock and Rover is an important person in our program. We actually have reading. Many of you know about reading dogs, and we've gotten the support of the organization. So we build in the children reading to the dogs and journaling to the dogs. Again, these are some of the pet partners' dogs interacting. And again, you can see the stories relate to this. Again, what you have to understand is that this study is a very sophisticated study. So although this project is really kind of fun and have affect, we are measuring this with a double-blind study. People have no idea which kids are which kids. It's a 3-year study. So, and it's the same way, the same measures that we do with pharmacology are some of the same measures that we're using with these kids to look at. And I have no idea if this is working yet, but we're going to find out at the end. One of the parts that we bring in, that's why I wanted to show this, I wrote a manual teaching the kids how to become good teachers to dogs. Because if we could teach them those behaviors, could they learn to practice it in their real lives? So we not only have therapy dogs, we have canine companion animals that are puppies that come in. So we start off learning the dog training with the therapy dogs, which kind of know the rules. Like when my dog Magic was in the first cohort to just practice a little bit, she sort of looked at me, the kid said sit, she's looking going, well, it's pretty easy. And we're calm, but basically when you start bringing puppies in, it's a whole new ball game. And we might actually bring my little pal Ketsi in 5 months because she'll be the right age to be a puppy, because she can misbehave in that one, and to see how she does. These puppies are great. You can see the kids learning how to get the dog to sit, come, and then we talk about these issues. Again, lots of different ways. And this is actually the manual that I developed I pulled out some slides because I knew the timing wasn't going to work, where basically part of the curriculum, we teach children different forms of assertive, positive interactions. 3 humans represent that role: Cool Craig, Mean Max, and Wimpy Wally. Okay? And then we have counterparts that are dogs. And of course, the dog that's the cool dog is Rock and Rover. We have Mean Mac and Wimpy Webster. So that in essence, they match the exact thing. So sometimes when we see the kids, again, they start getting the comparisons. But they learn lots of social behaviors. In the social skill part, we teach them how do you cooperate, how do you talk with people, how do you handle accepting no for an answer. And then we also sometimes do this with the dogs. So for example, when a dog is doing something that maybe we feel that we don't want the dog to do, you say, you know, for the dog to come, and we say that's great, accepting. Again, Rock and Rover behavior. So here's some of the kids actually doing some of the training. As you can see, that they've done a great job with that. I couldn't do this well if I couldn't talk about the welfare of the animals. Those of you that are pet partners, how many of you are pet partners? That's good. You need to recognize that your animals trust you impeccably. And therefore, if they trust you so much, we are their ambassadors to safety. You need to recognize that you have to know, and I wish I had more hours to talk about how do you read stress signals in dogs or cats. How do you know when they need breaks? My dogs, not only, I told you, go to vets and things like that, they have drivers that pick them up. They get driven to a park. They get break times. The hard part for me, in fact, when I thought about it, was Puppy. I remember I thought Puppy was getting a bit older, and I said, well, I'll just retire her. Was it easy to retire a therapy dog? Because all of a sudden she's going, my wife called me the first week we did this. She said, you got to come home. I go, why do I have to come home? She said, Puppy is sitting at the front door. So I had to rethink about how do you retire a therapy dog. In her case, what we did is we reduced her interactions. I had one room that became sort of, I don't want to use the word a nursery, but there was one room where she could lie, and we just turned off the lights. When she was ready to come out, she just walked out. But if she was lying there quietly, kids could just walk by and not interact with her. How do I put situations where kids may or may not be as friendly? I don't put my dogs through that kind of situation. So you have to be aware of the animal welfare. And I really like this quote: those who wish to pet and baby animals may love them, but those who respect their nature and wish to let them live normal lives love them more. And I think we have to recognize again that these aren't beings that we can deal with. If you're interested in this because of the timing, I have a couple of chapters and articles I've written about welfare issues of therapy animals. There's a lot of risk, in my opinion. You need to look at the welfare concerns, that they're groomed well, they're eating well, they're drinking well, not put into stressful situations. I really think this is important, loss of dignity. I don't dress up my animals. Once in a while on Halloween, I might put a Halloween hat on and my dogs will look at me like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. But people say to me, do your dogs do tricks? They can, but they're not here for show and tell. I give lectures all over the country, and people always say, well, how come your dogs aren't here? And I let them know that they're not show and tell. They deserve the respect, and in fact, when they're not working with me, they want to be dogs. So they want to get dirty. That's always funny. I sometimes take them to a park before work, and God forbid, I don't know how I would do it in this state, because sometimes PJ loves to get wet. Especially in the dog park early in the morning, she'd like to roll, and then I go, oh, I got to go home now and give you a bath, or clean you up, because I would never want somebody to say, your dog's dirty or smells. But the reality is, loss of dignity is an issue that we need to respect and realize. So, if you're interested in this, you can talk to me. I have a protocol that I actually developed with an ethicist that worked at a hospital that looked at ethical concerns. When we wrote this chapter first, Dr. Serpell of the University of Pennsylvania, Ray Coppinger, who's the leading dog expert, they were co-authors with me. And this time we also have another person in this new version named Jose Peralta, who's the animal welfare person at Western's vet school in Pomona, California. He joined us in that chapter. So I'm going to skip through these for a second. You need to realize that one of my goals in the next few years that I still have left to do this kind of work before I retire is I'm really interested in evidence-based approaches. As a clinician, I'm really concerned about how to move a field. You do need to realize that even in psychotherapy and even in medicine, what's really interesting is 40% of variance in medicine relates to the therapist or the physician. How many of you, when you go to a doctor, sometimes the doctor may not know everything, but the doctor is so kind and caring that you really like the doctor and you trust them? How many of you agree that you do better with a doctor you trust than you don't trust them? And that's interesting. So it's the same thing with psychotherapy, and I think that's one of the reasons why we believe animals will be helpful. But that's why studies like the one that we're doing, there are a couple of other major, large studies. I'm actually involved now in a study, I hope that will get funded, that will look at autism and the roles that animals have in treating kids with autism. The reality is these studies that provide more evidence will make our field grow further. On the other hand, you do need to become sort of an encyclopedia, even a condensed version. So when people go out, they just don't say, well, this is a cute idea. Because I remember when I first began to do this, people say, what do you pay your employees? Dog bones? You know, or they look and say, oh, look how cute it is that the dog's here. But now I think people are beginning to see what this is more, except we don't totally understand it. And the reason we see more of this is the fact that media and popular press really push it. Like, for example, this Friday there's going to be a new movie about a dolphin. And I guarantee you the conversations about the impact of dolphins will come up in a conversation. Every time a warm-hearted dog film or a cat film or a bird film or a horse film comes out, people talk more about this issue. I'd like to give you one more example and then go to our end of our conversation. And that's my lovely wife. Hi, honey. I see you there. My wife, I have known her a long time. We've grown up with each other. The dog you see, the puppy to the right, my right, I guess, her name became Magic. A boy said to me, you know, Dr. Fine, you think you're such a big shot magician, but the best magic you have in your office are these creatures with four paws. And he said that to me, and we met when I got Magic. My friend's dog had a litter. And basically, he said to me, would you like one of her puppies? And I love Mabel. And I said, well, I love it. But when we asked my wife, she said, no, remember, you know, she runs a tight ship. Remember, I'll never forget the first time I got a dog, she looked at me and said, remember, we're never going to have one pet. At the time, she didn't realize that she'd become Mrs. But the reality was, she said no. But he kept on asking as the litter grew older, and before he was adopted, you know, he wanted to give us one more shot. And finally, she said yes. Well, a few weeks before we were going to get the puppy, she had to get an appointment for a mammogram. The week before we were going to pick up Magic, she went in for the mammogram. They called and said they didn't like something that they saw. They said, could they do an ultrasound? And 2 days later, my wife was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. That's why this walk today sort of touched me a bit, so it really went full circle with me. My wife didn't tell me right away. In fact, I kept on asking her what the doctor said. She said, oh, well, they didn't call you. In fact, I remember asking her, or saying to her, you know, they should have called you already. So either you call them or I'm going to sit here with you and I'm going to call. That was when she ended up telling me that she had cancer, because she was having a hard time dealing with this. The day she picked up Magic, she knew that she had breast cancer. And she went to pick up Magic, and as Magic was running around the house, and that's what she kind of looked like. When I arrived, Magic was full of pet and roaming around the house like she owned it. Finally, in her crate, it was time for the long drive home, because Magic lived in San Diego then. As I backed up, Magic began to whimper. I told her I knew how she felt. I was scared too. Our relationship began at this moment. Two scared souls looking for comfort from one another. I was about to find my best friend, and really they are remarkable friends. 2.5 weeks later, my wife had her surgery, and Magic, who looked like that, would sit with her. It was amazing that they would cover Magic with lye on her chest, on the breast that didn't have the surgery. She would nudge her periodically. It's funny because my wife had a husband that was a psychologist, but it didn't matter that I could listen. She was so angry at having cancer. She was really, you saw what she looked like. She was the epitome of good eating and good exercise, and she was angry at cancer. Magic had the patience to work with her, and I never forgot when she said to me, I guess we were supposed to get her. Taking care of her is keeping me busy and bringing me joy. That was the real comment. And the neatest thing that they did every day when Magic was a puppy, and as she does today, is they hold hand and paw together. And they do this every day still. And I just think it's the neatest thing. And look forward to that paw hopping up, and they'll just sort of hang out. But it was that paw that got things to start. My favorite person is Albert Einstein. And I say this sincerely, and I know you giggle because I try to find a picture of Albert looking like a dog. But Albert said something that I want to leave you with. Although I scientifically am very interested in this, I have a passion. I have a passion that started really late in my life. I have a passion that taught me that I can fall in love with a being that's not human, and that they could share that love with me. Doing this, that by serendipity brought me back. And I mentioned Grandma Moses' life is what he gives you. You just got to make the best of it. I watched a dog that was abused turn around and become one of the best healers, the best co-therapists I've ever had. But as Albert once said, not everything that can be counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So I'm not sure what the next 15, 20 years will bring us. Will science get us further along? I hope so. I hope my studies and the studies of all my colleagues around the world will get us to a different frontier. But if we don't, it still doesn't discount what we're talking about. So with that thought in mind, I'd like to help you understand that science sometimes has a hard time explaining the medical ambiguities that we have. Because sometimes hope and love are ingredients that are hard to quantify. So do you believe in my budding magic? I do. And what I'd like to leave you with, and before we leave, I have a gift for all of you if you want, a sticker of magic that says, do you believe in magic? The 4 o'clock time to leave this correctly and see if this thing is going to work or not. I don't know if it's going to work. Let me go to the back. This had a Hollywood ending, but this is not working. Oh, just flip up. I had the song by the Do You Believe in Magic, but it's not clicking. So I'm sorry that part didn't work, but it's been an honor to really be here with you today. I hope you've been able to share a little bit with me. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to answer questions. I know we're a bit later than we need to. So again, if you want, I have a sticker here. If you're interested in one of the books, they're back there. But it's been